Hello, everybody. Okay, so welcome to today's webinar. It is called Lessons Learned from the Unicorn Project. My name is Summer. I'm the community manager here at Instana, and we're super excited to be presenting this session today. So we have Gene Kim. He's the author of the Unicorn Project. We also have Instana's own Pavlo Baron. He's our CTO. And then today's panel will be moderated by Kevin Crawley, our developer evangelist. So before I hand the mic over to our lovely gentleman, I have a couple of notes to cover regarding this webinar. So first, today's webinar will be recorded and available on demand after the live session and will be sent to your email or through Instana's website. And also, we're going to be giving away 10 copies of the Unicorn Project to attendees of this webinar. So winners will be randomly drawn, but you must attend the entire webinar to qualify. So we'll let you know who the winners are towards the end, so stay tuned. And winners will receive an email from us later today for the shipping logistics. So without any further delay, I'd like to kick things off and I'll hand it over to Kevin.
All right, thank you so much, Summer, and welcome to both my guests today. I have the honor of being joined by Pavlo Baron, CTO of Instana, and Gene Kim, author of both the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project. Now, I've had the pleasure of meeting Gene while we were both in Tokyo. We were speaking at DevOps Days last year, and it's great to finally have the opportunity to bring them both together here with Pavlo, who I work closely with here at Instana. Now, I read your book over the holiday, Gene, and it hit really close to home as a practitioner and somebody who actually, did the DevOps things for a few years. And I've been in many of the situations that you outlined in the book.
Oh, did we lose Kevin? Yes.
Yes, we did actually. Yeah, sorry. So as I mentioned, I've been in many of the situations that you outlined in your book, the entire book really. And I wanted to talk about a couple of circumstances in there, which our audience is very familiar with. Now, before we dive into the content, I just want to make sure they know a little bit about the situation first. So could you tell us a little bit more about the Unicorn Project and what the 5 ideals are?
Yeah, for sure. And Kevin, it's so great to have met you last year and be on this webinar today with Pavlo. Yeah, so the Unicorn Project takes place in the same universe as the Phoenix Project, but instead of being told from the perspective of ops leadership, it's being really told through the eyes of a senior developer. And the question then becomes like, why read the Unicorn Project? And I think there's a whole bunch of problems that still remain that I am very passionate about. One is that there's this absence of understanding of all the invisible structures required to truly enable developers to be productive. Two is there's this other problem of how do we get data to where it resides to where it needs to go, which is in the hands of developers so they can use it in daily work. And so this is almost exactly orthogonal to the problem that the DevOps community rightly pointed out, which is it was so hard to get code to where it needed to go, which is in production, so that customers can actually get value. So I wanted to explore this other orthogonal problem where data is often in systems of records, data warehouse, and it takes weeks, months, or even quarters to get it so that it can be used by potentially 30 to 50% of company employees who use or manipulate data in their daily work. And then lastly, there's often this very strong opposition to support these new ways of working like DevOps. I want to explore that. And so the frame to tell that story and to highlight the things that I've just grown to care so much about is the 5 ideals. So just in the Phoenix Project, we had the 3 ways. In the Unicorn Project, we have the 5 ideals. And so the first is locality and simplicity. And so this is to what extent can people get what needs to get done without having to take everybody out to lunch. So if you have to get a feature done, how many people actually need to work on it, and how many people do you need to take out to lunch to actually get it done? Is it the Amazon ideal of the 2-pizza team, or do you have to take out the entire building? And so a complex deployment is a great example of that. So in the ideal, if you want to change something or implement something, you can change one file, one module, one namespace, one application, one container, whatever, right? Not ideal is you have to change all of them, right? And that means you have to communicate, coordinate, synchronize, and marshal with everybody in the organization. The second ideal is, I think, what the outcomes of the first ideal are: focus, flow, and joy. And so as a developer, I think we gravitate towards technology because we love the work that we do. And so Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi talked about flow as that feeling that when we are doing the work that we enjoy and love, we lose track of time and maybe even sense of self. So it's that transcendental moment when we are truly immersed in work that we enjoy. And so that means that we, as a developer, we're spending our best time and energy solving the business problem. The opposite of that is that we're just mired in infrastructure and security, operations, telemetry, right? These are important things, but that's not things that we want developers to be focused on. We want that to be capabilities that every developer can be enabled by. The third ideal is improvement of daily work. And so this showed up in the Phoenix project, saying that improvement of daily work is more important than even daily work itself. And so one of the key themes of the book is technical debt. And the only way you can manage technical debt and remain productive is by prioritizing improvement of daily work even over the feature. The fourth ideal is another prerequisite: psychological safety. And so this came out in the State of DevOps report, but also showed up so much in the work that Google did to understand what made great teams great. And at the top of the list year after year was the notion of psychological safety. To what extent do members of a team feel comfortable saying what they really think without fear of castigation, blame, made to feel stupid, or whatever? And so this is a leadership issue as well as a cultural norm, and so fragile. And then the fifth ideal is customer focus. To what extent are we working on problems that customers value and pay us for? And so I think one of the best examples is all the things that used to be in our data centers, right? Like payroll systems, ERP systems, and so forth. They're critical, they're mission critical, but do customers really pay us for world-class payroll systems? And the answer is almost decisively no. And so if it's not a core competency, then perhaps it's better left to a vendor where it is their core competency, and that allows us to reallocate people from context into core. So sorry for that long introduction to the 5 ideals. Does that resonate with you, Kevin?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things, there's a couple things in there I want to unpack and explore a little bit more, and it's the idea of focus, flow, and joy, and psychological safety. And this really comes down to how do we manage our systems? How do we understand them? And how do we work together safely so that we can move the needle in the right direction? So one of the things that you mentioned was accomplished deployments, and later in the book, around chapter 15, there's a situation unfolding here. And we all have it. I mean, literally, I remember being in an office and there was a room labeled war room, and it was a depressing place. Nobody wanted to go there. And it's because these things are the stuff of nightmares, and it really speaks to the necessity of observability when we're deploying software, because you mentioned we need accomplished deployments. Now, Gene, would you share with our audience what's going on in this chapter, what's happening in the war room and how they got there? So our listeners have a understanding of the situation, a little bit of context and frame of reference.
Yeah, for sure. So this is about midway through the book, and this is all about the Black Friday launch. In fact, this is actually the preparation for the Big Friday launch, of which, it's probably not an overstatement to say that all of the company fortunes are hinging upon this, right? This is actually what the Phoenix project was meant to deliver for the company. It's actually a smaller team that actually made it happen. This unicorn project team that really was decoupled from the big wad of mud that actually enabled developers to get what they needed done. And so in chapter 15, in the rehearsal launch, they found out right before, they sent out a campaign to 1% of the customers that everything was going wrong. That people were getting 400 errors, APIs were returning 500 errors, right? And so they managed to fix that before the actual launch, but it's actually during the real launch on Black Friday that is really one of my favorite scenes, where they just initiate a campaign that goes out to tens of millions of the customers, and then suddenly, no one can actually execute a successful transaction. So there's a big graph on the wall, showing the sales funnel where people are going to the front page, they're putting items in the shopping cart, they're going to check out, and they're posting numbers and revenue, people are cheering, and suddenly it stops. And like no one knows what's going on, right? In fact, no one knows what services could be causing it. They don't know how many they could be. Certainly don't know which one it is. And I just love that it takes them 20 minutes to finally figure out, oh, it's this service, and it's actually one of the most humble, probably underappreciated services there are. It's the fulfillment application, where it's the application where you after you click the checkout button, it's the one that takes the service that takes the product ID and the zip code and determines which shipping options are available. Which delivers, like FedEx and UPS, and is next day air available or second day air, and it's crashing, right, because they're being rate limited by their external service. So I think that Kevin, that scene was really meant to show kind of the chaos and bewilderment that happens in almost every major incident, where it just is so difficult to understand what's going wrong, and it's happening at the worst possible time when every second matters. Does that resonate with you, Kevin and Baron?
Yeah, absolutely. Pavlo, if you would just take a moment and share with your perspective on the situation. I know we have a few extra minutes here to discourse this. So I know you read this, and I just wanted to get your input.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Gene. It's an honor to speak here in this webinar together with you. I told you you're one of my heroes from back in my early days. Well, I mean, what shall I say? The situations like that are described there, I mean, I was not surprised at all. I was like, oh my God, that happened to me so many times. And they're all over the place, right? And I think I always thought that war rooms themselves are an entire pattern. It is a symptom for something that is going wrong. And of course, as a strong believer in what we as Instana are building, I can tell you that Instana customers don't experience this kind of situations, at least not this way, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, there is still trouble, and we cannot heal all the broken systems out there, for sure. There's no magic. But what our customers keep telling us all the time is that we really help them prevent situations like that, what you described there. And I mean, there's many different patterns, but by the end of the day, it's all panic, right? And we prevent them from happening or striking too hard, right? So when the situation happens, our solution tells them pretty precisely what to look at. Don't underestimate the problem, that the most important thing in this situation is focus and calmness, right? So we help them to get to the root cause of what's going on within a very short time, ignoring the otherwise noise. I mean, it's all cool and everything to have all this dashboards with charts and all these different numbers flying around, but if you cannot focus during the incident, it is problematic. So they would otherwise spend hours and days panicking upon something we can help them with, right?
And so, I think one of the
Sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. The word that you use, focus, right? And I think I find that very powerful, because in the absence of information and evidence, the blast radius of the problem is everybody, right? So that notion of focus, flow, and joy, right? Or locality, right? In the absence of knowing, which is contributing to the problem, everybody has to be involved, right? Which is a terrible situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now imagine a war room in a distributed company, right? I mean, it's a thing of impossibility. So we get all these voices from our customers that tell us, hey, we'll literally help them avoid disaster or recover from it real quick without really significant damage. And there is evidence for this. We really believe in what we're building there, because some of us really went through a lot of pain that you've been describing in your book. And they also a very important thing is to prepare for so-called black swans. Taleb's book is great about that. You kind of want to prepare. It is not sufficient to know that there is a Black Friday coming, right? Your system is not the only one that needs to be prepared for that. Effectively, what we do with some of our customers, we help them prepare with our solution and our own, kind of mental support to prepare for this kind of World Championship, Black Fridays and whatsoever, because we know things will go wrong. The question is how bad, right? And you kind of need a solution like ours to get you through these hard times. So it is very good to know that there is a partner and a solution that can help you. And an incident as such is generally a mode in which the whole organization can be, right? I mean, it depends on just the outreach or, blast radius that you mentioned. And our product Instana helps keep people focused. This is very important on what matters during this tough time. And I wish, in my own career, I really wish I had Instana back in the day, as I was myself a young boy panicking about everything in the war room, right?
Well, I think in one of the things, I've found myself asking other people in the war room, and you're right, Pavlo, about the distributed part of companies. More and more these days, organizations are spread across the globe, and teams aren't centrally located anymore. So this concept of, we're going to do a big push, we're going to do a big release, that in and of itself is somewhat an anti-pattern from the approach of we're going to do small iterative releases, use feature flags to slowly roll these things out. But we recognize that that's not always feasible in every organization. So I think there's a moment in the war room in which they're trying to determine what service is talking to another and who wrote what code and what's happening, why the error is taking place. And tools like Instana, we designed Instana to answer those questions on the fly in real time when these things are actually happening, so that you don't have to go and chase down Brett, and you don't have to go and flag Jenny, who's in European time zone and you're in Eastern. So I think what's the most common theme in these type of scenarios is that they tend to take place over the course of several hours. You mentioned 20 minutes to find a source of a problem, and I mean, honestly, when we're dealing with very large, complex distributed systems, 20 minutes, that's millions of dollars, right? So if you can get that down to even 30 seconds, think about how much money you saved by getting your system up even that faster. So, I think one thing I wanted to ask you, Pavlo, what are some of the takeaways that you could share with the audience in terms of, what they should be expecting when they have an incident like this play out? Should they feel the pain and suffering initially and then find the solution, or would it make sense for them just to figure out what observability is and how it can help them?
Well, it's a difficult question. Of course, I don't want to wish anybody to suffer or experience any kind of pain, right? So I think you want to be prepared. I'm a strong believer in everything that might go wrong. At least you should know these scenarios and kind of have a plan to address them. You cannot prevent everything from happening. And as people like Mike Nygaard for a long time educating us, the worst entire pattern in operations is the user. So whenever you get the stuff in the hands of your user, everything will go wrong, right? Especially in the launch. So I am a strong believer in this kind of preparation and this kind of, know your problems beforehand and know how to address them, which naturally leads us in the necessity to make your systems observable when you have to look at them. Observability itself is a pretty simple thing. Instead of having a black box when it crashes and desperately try to understand what's going on, just be prepared. Just make this thing visible from inside so you can look at it. The problem is that, I mean, this is a pretty new trend and approach. We have so many legacy systems out there in the wild world, so you kind of need systems like Instana, for example, to automatically instrument your systems to make them observable effectively. So you're not left alone just with with your few new microservices and the rest of the application that was written 10 years ago you cannot look inside, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, in fact, I would make the claim that not only is this a universal problem, but it's actually probably getting worse or dramatically worse now, just because applications are so much more distributed. So in this push for developer productivity, we don't want these systems that are so tightly coupled together where a developer can't do what they need to do without having to communicate, coordinate with, everyone else in that application, right? And so the notion of domain-driven design, microservices, allows them to work independently of each other, to be able to test independently of each other, which I think is very powerful. And so it is, I think we're seeing this grand decoupling. And you can see this in every one of the tech giants, whether it's Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, or even the smaller, but also very successful startups, whether it's like Pinterest and GitHub and so forth. But I've even encountered this even in my own work. When you decouple things through message buses, like in Google Pub Sub, I've had situations where I didn't know that I had two subscribers running at the same time. So I was getting, two side-affecting operations, and it took me a day to realize this odd behavior was because I actually had one too many things running in production. And so just I think this underscores that this problem is so difficult, just because the architectures we're using, and you don't have to be very big at all, right, to experience, complete, total misunderstandings of how systems are actually working in production versus how we think they're running in our head. Does that resonate with you, Pavlo?
Absolutely. I mean, imagine most incidents happen while you sleep, right? I mean, we already have jokes in this industry saying that this thing knows when I go to bed, so it will wake me up with an alert. And I mean, when you wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning with an incident, the last thing you want to do is kind of try to analyze and understand. Your brain is tired, your eyeballs don't work properly. You kind of need sufficient hints. You need information, right? You need to know what to do, and that's you as a team should strive for that. There are solutions for that, like Instana. Well, you can try to do it by hand, but by the end of the day, you want this kind of observability, right?
Right, and I think there's been this idea that distributed systems are super complicated and super hard to manage, and we have organizations out there that are even pulling it back away from building distributed microservices apps and going back to the monolith model. And I'm not going to disparage or try to detract from those organizations' choices because they have all the details. I don't. But I think one of the things that is really challenging for organizations who are trying to build up these highly productive developer environments is the understanding around them. And I want to go back to the incident for a moment, and I want to hear what your opinion is, Pavlo and Jean, on what's really helpful when these situations erupt and the building is on fire.
Right.
I mean, you both have worked closely with customers, with colleagues, and your own businesses managing these types of incidents. So you have a firsthand understanding of what it's like to be there.
Yeah, in fact, maybe just to quickly react, Pablo and I were having a great time talking before the webinar about my favorite programming language, Clojure, the functional programming language that runs on the JVM, which really introduced the joy of coding back into my daily life. But one of the things that people do joke about in the Clojure community are the the stack traces. I mean, they are like nothing I've seen before. But as much as we complain about stack traces, right, they are awesome to have around, right, which are often completely missing in distributed systems. Or rather, you have stack traces, but they're not going to help you understand who called you and why and what's going wrong, or where do I find when something goes wrong, whose stack trace should I be looking at, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there is this really speaks to the hidden cost of the complexity you introduce when you take something that used to be all in one place and then spread it out. And so I think as much as we disparage stack traces at times, right, those are in simple monolithic systems where there's only one. I mean, stack traces are an incredible aid to tell you who called who, what went wrong, right, that are often completely absent in distributed systems without more instrumentation. And Pablo, I have to imagine, given your experience in Clojure and all types of architectures, this must resonate with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but it's not only closure systems that experience trouble, right? So, right. So, Kevin, if you ask me what is the most important thing, I think I mentioned this a few minutes ago. When you're in the incident, the most important thing is to stay focused and stay calm and have a clear mind. Because, I mean, I understand it's all emotional. It's easier said than it's done. But that is what's necessary, because as you said, every single second might lead to a loss of thousands of dollars, and you don't really have time to do things that are not absolutely directed towards the resolution of this one particular trouble at hand, right? And
Right.
and this is very important. And you know what people forget, who is the best thing, or what is the best thing on planet Earth that can do work but is not emotional? It's computers.
Right.
It's machines. I mean, this is very easy. I mean, okay, science fiction tries to sell us that machines will have emotions at some point. I'm not really believing that, but at least right now they don't have any. But we can totally rely on them. So we have this stand guy in our world, right? This is our representation of a virtual DevOps engineer. This is how we perceive Instana in your team. I mean, this guy will never ask for a raise. They're sitting around and observing everything. They know everything. They see everything. You kind of want to offload this kind of, stuff that you don't want to care on this kind of a machine. Plus also everything where you can really introduce human error, additional error during the incident situation.
Right.
So a high level of automation is absolutely necessary in situations like that. You want to just be focused on what you have to do by hand. To give you an example, you don't want to search who broke it. You want to know it immediately. You need helpers like this, right?
Wait, one last thing. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Gene.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to a very simple principle, right? In almost any, especially in complex activities, it helps to be able to see what you're doing, whether it's a surgical procedure, launching a rocket into space, right? Certainly fixing an outage with, hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of moving parts, right? You need to be able to see what you're doing.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned the stack trace component of understanding who's calling who and what's calling what. Well, Pavlo, you mentioned this idea you needed focus, you needed understanding, you needed visibility. And, in reality, what we're looking at here is we need something in place that can monitor and understand all these different transactions that are happening between our systems, and when they break, collect the information we need so that we can focus, we can have that visibility. And that's the beautiful thing about Instana, in my opinion, is that we collect all of that data, and we use something which is technologically called distributed tracing to collect all that information. But the challenge with that is it creates a ton of data. And organizations who are just now starting to journey down this path of DevOps, of distributed systems, they may not be very well versed in handling, managing, and understanding all that data. And what do we do with it? How do we look at it? How do we connect those pieces together? And that's kind of like the seg into the next section I want to talk about, and I want to hear from both of you. Is this idea in chapter 17? We learn about a change that's going to impact the team. Gene, I'd like to hear your summarization on what's happening here, and kind of share with the audience on what Jeffrey Moore tells us about evaluating what is core and what is context. Because again, I feel like as organizations start to make that shift, we're stuck with having to learn an entirely new field and a discipline to collecting and monitoring these things and understanding how they work, right?
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned Dr. Geoffrey Moore. So Dr. Geoffrey Moore is the person who wrote Crossing the Chasm, and that's where he created this incredible language about the product, how products evolve, right? You have the innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and the laggards. And then that was a phenomenal concept, and widely used now and across the technology space. But I think there's a bunch of us who believe that his even more important work was actually put into a book called Zones to Win. And he makes this very incredible claim that says there's really, he brings up the notion of core versus context. Core are the things that we do in our organization that create lasting, durable business advantage that our customers pay us for. And context is everything else. And so things that, as I mentioned before, right? Payroll, sales commission calculationing tools, right? Point of sales for in-house cafeteria systems, right? Those are important, right? But it's not something that customers value. They do not create lasting durable business advantage. And just to set the stage for this, the big aha moment for me was about a year ago when I was visiting CompuWare, the famous mainframe vendor, with a friend of mine, Dr. McKirsten, to spend the day with their CEO, because we just learned so much from him in the previous years. And we're walking to the CompuWare building. I look at the agenda, and I immediately feel embarrassed, right? Because the first thing on our agenda is a data center tour, and I turn to my buddy Mick, and I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. I had such high hopes for today. I don't know what, I don't know why this is on our agenda. I don't know what we're going to learn by, seeing their halon extinguishers. But
right.
It was
going deaf. Yeah.
Right. And yet it was one of the biggest aha moments of my professional career, because when you go into the data center, it was basically empty. There were 2 Z mainframes that they use, and the rest are all these empty data center floor space with these outlines of where the racks used to be. And in the middle of each outline is a tombstone that described what application and business process used to be there and how much money they saved by getting rid of it.
That's
so
great.
Things like on-prem email, help desk, their financial systems, payroll, etc. And so the big aha moment was, by doing this, by emptying out their data center, they were able to reallocate $8 million of cost that used to be in their back office, right? This context activities, and translate that into $8 million more they could spend on R&D. So things that customers absolutely do care about. And so in the unicorn, so I think that shows how not only are they managing context down, but they're making sure that context doesn't starve core. And so in the Unicorn project, they're doing something very similar, right? Is that to fund these important new activities, they take an unflinching look at each system, saying, is this something that's core? And if it's not, is this really something that we should be running at all? And that leads to 14 tons of equipment leaving the data center, and allowing 30 more developers to be tasked on the most exciting initiatives for the company, maybe at the expense of things that are near and dear to things that they used to think were important. Does that resonate? Does that characterize what caught your attention?
I think it does, and I think one of the things that most people imagine when they hear we have to make cutbacks is we have to lay off a bunch of people, and in reality, all you have to do there is make the case that these people are better allocated elsewhere, right? Their time and efforts are better spent focusing on what makes the business money, not at what makes the business lose money, right? So, absolutely.
Can I mention one more thing?
Yeah,
on
sure,
this?
absolutely.
And I'd love to hear Pavlo's thought as well. I mean, so there's a very famous investor, Brad Feld, who wrote this blog article about how there's a case that could be made for bringing cloud in house, right? And he said you could add, because you can depreciate it, you can increase gross margins by 10-20%. But there's something that seems very wrong to me. I talked about it with a friend of mine, and he said, "Yeah, no, it's true that you can increase gross margins by bringing cloud services in house, but the problem is opportunity cost, right? In his world, he would rather have developers work on features that customers care about, not having to maintain infrastructure that customers don't care about."
Absolutely. And yeah, Pablo, I'd love to hear about your experience within not only our organization, but our customers' organization on how they've gone about the challenge of handling, keeping what is not good enough and outsourcing what is more than good enough.
Right. It's a very hard problem, especially in the area of the industry we are operating in. So it's effectively around monitoring and troubleshooting. On one hand, you can perceive your monitoring solution commodity, and kind of there is an urge to outsource it, or at least get a product in that will do the job. But this is not how it works in a real project, right? In the early days, everybody's so excited and nobody knows anything, right? So what they do effectively, they build everything by hand, including everything monitoring, because they kind of try to get to the truth and see what they need to, what kind of knobs they need to use there and here, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're in the situation, let's assume this is a success, right? And then, the heroes of the early days are moving on. This is a very, very, very problematic situation from the perspective of both use cases, like monitoring and troubleshooting. I mean, people who wrote the whole thing in the beginning, they pretty much know what's going on. So they've learned enough, right? Well, when they are not there because they are so good and these experts are so rare, they will move somewhere else, either leave the company, just go for other challenges, or they will be moved onto different projects. What happens all the time, that what I see is that when you don't have a system where you formalize your problems and how to find and analyze them, like the real sophisticated APM solution that allows you to deep dive without really necessarily having a expert in hand, really every developer deep dive into what's going on, what's broken, and how to fix it. When you're in this situation, you will be pulling in your former experts all the time if you have access to them, right? You will be pulling them in no matter what, and nobody wants that. You don't want that as the one who's maintaining the system, right? And he doesn't want, or they don't want that, because I mean, they already left, right? They signed off. They don't want that. So we're in a kind of a dilemma here. It is very unpleasant. So the message from my side is, guys, just formalize and build upon abstractions. You need a system at hand that lets you express your system in a way that it doesn't break with every single deployment, because your monitoring after deployment is not the same monitoring as before deployment. It's two different things. Things change. You don't want to continuously maintain that. You don't want to continuously pull in experts to just do, kind of firefighting. You guys out there, you deserve better than that, right?
By the way, I saw a great example of this. There's a talk at AWS reInvent that it wasn't on the main stage, but it was phenomenal. It was basically a joint presentation between the Amazon Kubernetes team and some engineers from the Amazon retailing side. And so in their need to further improve developer productivity, because 136,000 deployments a day isn't enough, apparently, they're moving to this other architecture. And so they actually, inside of this one engineering group, they built their homegrown Kubernetes cluster, right? And it turned out to be this, an incredible burden to maintain. And just happened that they found out there was an AWS team that was working on this, offering that's sort of like GKE, we'll manage your Kubernetes instance for you, and just the gratitude being expressed by the development team, right? Just saying, oh my gosh, thank goodness we don't have to figure out what we're doing wrong with our Kubernetes cluster, right? Which is arguably one of the most difficult things to maintain. So I think it shows just how important it is that we keep developers focused on the problems they want to solve, right? And everything else, right, should be as part of a shared service. It should be someone's core competency, right? And that's ideally what we want, right? We want to be leveraging someone else's core competencies and being able to leverage that year after year, at the, with the only, we just trade money for increased capabilities, which is a great place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. You just want you don't want hidden costs like opportunity cost and the like, right? You don't want all that, because if your people are not doing what they are being paid for, or with what they should be excited about, is effectively delivering the value to your business, right? Making customers happy, making users happy, etc., etc. If they are not doing this, and your business is not particularly monitoring, so you're not implementing a monitoring solution, there is no reason to do everything on your own. You kind of need to get help. This is valid for any kind of. I mean, you would also not implement a financial accounting system this day, probably. Maybe you would. Some people would, I guess, but you probably will get some help from outside, right? So this is also valid for any kind of observability tooling.
By the way, I heard this another great example that came from just the cloud space, right? Is just by being in the cloud, each year and a half, your cloud costs will go down because of, the billions of dollars of R&D spend, making sure that, the cost of infrastructure keeps going down. What a great position to be in, right? That's, I think, so very, very visible. And I think that's ideally what we want to be able to get from every one of the vendors that we have, whether it's technology or non-technology, is that we benefit from all of their innovation just by being customers.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I
Right.
think the biggest advantage there is, these costs that we would have to spend in those situations where, we're trying to get ramped up into the platform, we're trying to build knowledge around it. That begins transitioning into real value, and that begins transitioning into this notion that now that we're here in the cloud, we can spend more time, effort, and developer hours and productivity at solving our customers' problems and really focusing on delivering the business value rather than focusing on how do I keep the server in the data center running 24/7, 365 days a year.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I think that there's a lot of value in, Pavlo mentioned, and I want to unpack a little bit, there's a situation where a lot of times these larger organizations are, they're undertaking these innovation efforts internally. So they're trying to build a small DevOps team, very close knit group of people who, you have an operations focused engineer, you have software developers, you have some front end developers, maybe a project manager, and they're all co-located on the same team. And it goes back to this notion of a pizza box team, but realistically, typically those types of efforts are very shoestring in budget. And so they spend a lot of time building up their own monitoring solution, which is something that I did before I found Instana. And I was leveraging all these wonderful open source tools that kind of got me about 30% there. Like I had a general understanding of hey, is my cluster up here healthy? Is the CPU working? Is the memory working? Is the cluster responding like how I expect it to? But one thing I didn't understand is how the applications were talking to each other, how they were working. So, and once we did install Instana on our cluster, all of this wonderful knowledge was bestowed upon us on how these applications are not only working with each other, but how I could better optimize certain aspects of my databases, or how I could better realize the capacity of this cluster and better utilize it. So, before we close out, I know that Gene, you've studied a great number of organizations throughout the past decade, and the research you've done with your past 2 books. How do you feel companies? How often do you feel that these companies are spending these resources just in contrary to where they should be spending, and/or building these tools which may already exist? And how can incorporating horizon planning and those 5 ideals help them realize where that true value is?
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, I have a similar kind of experience, and that comes from the my days at Tripwire. So I was the technical founder of a company called Tripwire from 1997 to 2010. So I was there for 13 years, and that was based on a independent study project I did at Purdue University. And so that was one of the most widely used security tools for Unix at the time. But we would also run into they would say, back then, recalling from 15 almost 20 years ago, was that our biggest competition was the homegrown solution. And it's kind of interesting to look back at that now, right? Because I think it very much mirrors what Pavlo and Kim, what you were saying, which is that exactly, is a very predictable thing, right? We love building things, we love solving our own problems, but then it becomes mission critical, and now it's being used by scores of other teams, and that does put that person who built it in a really terrible position, right? Because they can't ever stop with their they can't do anything else, right? They're chained to the solution they built. So I think I would, if I wish I could go back in time and kind of give myself advice, which is the notion of like, what do we really want to be working on, right? And this is actually something that might be holding us back. I actually got to ask the person who built that data center at CompuWare. I got to ask him, what did it feel like, for you to start emptying that data center out, even though you probably spent a good chunk of the last decade filling it up.
Right.
And he said it felt terrible, right? It was but he said there was even a sense of false pride, right? Is that I used to think that I was doing my job and I was doing what was good for our customers by putting things in there that shouldn't be there, right? And so Chris O'Malley, the CEO, spoke incredibly eloquently about the need to celebrate emptying out the data center. So every business process or applications they retired, they announced at the town hall. They would build the generating of the milestones would be something that would be celebrated and appreciated by the entire company. And I thought that was just showed how just seeing everything through the eyes of the customer just makes
really
it very
mature,
clear.
actually.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll mention is that is not just opportunity cost, right? It is the fact that when you are using a vendor for things that aren't core activities, you get to benefit from all of their innovation and their R&D. And so I think so it's worse than just opportunity cost. It's opportunity cost plus the inability that you're missing out on these other innovations that are being created for you. So I think I think I had that better context 20 years ago. I think that would have led to some different decisions and different outcomes.
For sure. Well, and this reminds me of, I had a job where we literally, the team would celebrate when we committed subtractions from our code base.
Yeah.
It was like all of a sudden somebody did a PR and there's suddenly 5,000 less lines of code. Everybody's like, yes, that is one less thing we have to manage. One less complexity that we have to deal with, one more thing that we get to pull out that isn't going to break anymore. And so it's a really, really healthy way to look at these things when we take it from the lens of, is this change or is this offloading ultimately benefiting the business? And so, I mean, I'd also like to hear, Pavlo, and Instana is still a relatively young company, right? So,
Right.
Is there any experience where, even within our own organization, where we've had that kind of moment where we were like, all of a sudden, somebody else is taking care of something for us, and we can focus more on what our business needs?
Whew. I mean, we are a I mean, we are a startup, right? I mean, we use every single tool that is needed to get the job done. So we kind of have this in the bones, in the blood, to not to reinvent the wheel that is not absolutely necessary to get our job done, which is provide customers with the best possible monitoring / APM solution on planet Earth, right? And this is the mission that we have. Everything else is you need to support your people. You need to give them access to this and to that. So of course we have a long time tradition not to. I mean, what does it mean long time? I mean, we're around for like 5-6 years. But from the beginning we said we don't reinvent the wheels that are not needed to be reinvented. And we also have the flexibility to switch to other tools, right? So like even for today, our CEO announced some changes in some business data. We suddenly use a totally different tool. I'm excited about all that because this is this keeps us young, right? And every kind of organization should be operating like that. Don't write code for something that is not your core business. Don't do it. And monitoring is part of it, by the way, because anything you do in monitoring, you can consider a kind of a code, even the configuration whatsoever. Just consider it exactly like that. Somebody with expertise who needs to do something that costs them time, right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think in one of the things I want to point out, and this is one of my favorite examples of what happens when you do your own monitoring. One of the things that I always look at is GitLab. They publish their own Grafana dashboards, and anybody can go and look at them, right? But if you go there and you start poking around, almost 70% of them don't work, and so it shows you what the realities are of trying to roll this stuff yourself. And is eventually you're just going to accrue a bunch of non-working, non-functional things that make it harder to find where the root where the problem is actually happening when you're suffering from an incident or an outage of any sort. Well, great. So we're almost out of time here. I want to give enough time for Summer to wrap things up, and I just want to give a warm thank you and appreciation for both Gene and for Pavlo for joining me today and having this conversation about the Unicorn project, and also about how Instana we are trying to solve this pain point that comes up so very much in not only everybody's organizations, but as Gene points, he wrote an entire chapter about dealing with an incident. So thank you, Gene, for writing these chapters and for sharing the suffering and the pain that all of us are all too familiar with. And thank you, Pavlo, for creating a great product in which solves some of those pain points. So with that,
thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. And by the way, it's a problem that we all face, and it's just a pleasure. And I gotta tell everybody out there, Pablo gave me some advice an hour ago about that's going to change my life, about remapping the caps lock key to the command key, which I think is going to solve this problem I've been having for about 6 months with my hands. So thank you, Pablo. I mean, I'll
Yeah,
keep you
thanks
posted.
a lot. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
We have some more next in our product, something like that, something between the lines. You should go
Yeah.
check it out.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah,
Thanks a lot.
wonderful.
thank you.
Yeah. Thank you again, Kevin and Gene and Pablo. So before I announce the book winners, I'd like to let you know that there'll be a survey at the end of the webinar. It's going to pop up on your screen, and we'd love to have you fill it out and give us some feedback. So thank you in advance for that. And so for today's book giveaway, we have randomly chosen 10 names to receive a free copy of The Unicorn Project by Gene Kim. And so those people are as followed. We have Carlos Blanco, Sue Hannon, Dan Peterson, Dean Woodworth, Eric Lindblom, Harold Reitman, Jay Kim, Jed Savick, Mike Burnham, and Richard Gann. And so we'll be in touch with you all shortly. Keep an eye on your email that you used to sign up for this webinar. And for everyone else, thank you all for attending. I hope you enjoyed our webinar, and please follow us on Twitter at Instana HQ to stay in touch and learn about upcoming webinars. All right, have a great day, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.